All right, welcome back to the great room. Now, one of the best things about FinOps X here in Barcelona is the people, and I'm super honored to announce you the next speakers. Rick Ochs is from AWS and is part of our technical advisory council, and Johnston from Capital One is part of our governing board, is a member of our governing board, so super excited to have them. And when I read the first slide or the title of the slides, I thought this will be more of a strategic, business-oriented talk around FinOps, and then I went looking into the slides, and you're in for a treat, and right in time for lunch. So it is with great honor to announce on stage Ann Johnston and Rick Ochs for this next talk.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to FinOps X. We're excited to talk to you today about cloud financial management and FinOps as it relates to AWS tooling. Before we get started, I want to kind of talk about how Ann and I met. So we were at reInvent last year, and we had this really cool FinOps mixer at this bar at the Venetian, which is out in front of kind of like by the main Las Vegas Strip. And we were having this FinOps mixer, and somebody from the Duckbill group grabbed me and said, "You have to meet Ann." And they drug me through this entire crowd of hundreds of people at this bar and put me in front of Ann and said, "Ann knows so much about all the things that are wrong with your tools." And I'm like, oh no, how stressful to hear that, right? And then I met Ann, and Ann immediately launched into a bunch of improvement ideas for our compute optimizer right size recommendations, specifically with the Lambda recommendations. And she immediately launched into a 10-minute series of examples of how to improve the recommendation algorithms to find more savings, and described how at Cap One they focus on this so much. It was really cool. And so what was funny is we met, we talked about it, and then the very next morning we had an EBC, and I arrived, and there was Ann sitting there with her entire team.
My notebook ready to...
Yeah, and so we went through and captured all of the feedback and got it into the roadmap and backlog and everything. Really cool experience.
Yeah, so the feedback I got after that was from my team members that were there. They were more impressed with how you handled me than anything else. I was very, very passionate at that time about some improvements that could be made, and I'm still waiting for them.
I'm working on it. There's so much work to be done. We're excited. I love building stuff. I represent a team back home in Seattle and New York that works diligently on all of our optimization tooling and compute optimizer, savings plans, reservations. We're excited to talk today about a few of the product launches we've done throughout this year. And Ann is going to talk about how they've implemented some of these new features in her FinOps practice. So we're going to go through some of them one by one and then kind of go back and forth. Well, I'll talk about the feature and how we built it, and Ann will talk about how it's implemented. So the first on the agenda is the DynamoDB reservation recommendations. Show of hands, how many of you have seen the announcement of the new DynamoDB recommendations? Okay. Okay, all right. I'm glad to hear that. And then we're also going to talk about split cost allocation for EKS. Again, a show of hands, how many of you have taken a look at that feature? Okay. And then data exports. Everybody should raise their hand because it's got the Focus data set, right? The Focus 1.0 preview data. We also launched Cost Optimization Hub data exports as well, and that allows you to export in the same fashion all of that data from Cost Optimization Hub, which includes recommendations from Compute Optimizer, savings plans, reservations, all of it in one data schema. Okay, so first let's dive into DynamoDB reserved capacity recommendations. Okay, so I'm gonna rewind a little bit or start at a high level and talk about DynamoDB pricing models. How many of you are familiar with how DynamoDB is priced? Okay, so we're gonna level set on that first. So there's 3 different pricing models for DynamoDB. There's on-demand, and this is kind of pretty similar to other services out there. You pay kind of as you utilize the service. You pay for the read and write operations. And it's really for maybe early on in an engineering cycle when you're maybe trying out DynamoDB or you're doing some development of a new project. And there's no upfront commitment associated to on-demand. Then there's provisioned, and this is when you set a certain amount and prepay for your read-write capacity units. And this is for as soon as your workloads start to stabilize a little bit, you're going to want to switch over to that provision model. And it's really good for that predictable, steady traffic. And there's also no commitment for this pricing model as well. And then the third model, which I think everybody here is probably most interested in, is the reservation model, where you get discounts for a 1 or 3 year commitment. And this is when, say, you've deployed in production and you know you're running DynamoDB and for certain applications long term, then you can make a 1 or 3 year commitment. It lowers the hourly cost or the cost for the reads and writes. And then, of course, you can benefit from the discount. So that's kind of the pricing model. Now, the questions that we routinely get are, when do I switch? When do I move from on-demand to provisioned? So we talked a little bit about, in the engineering cycle, you really want to make a change when you're going from a proof of concept or you're kind of kicking the tires on the service to see if this is the right service for your application. And as soon as you start to see this DynamoDB spend kind of month over month in your bill, that's when it kind of starts to make sense to go to the provision model. But then the next question is a little bit harder. When do I go from provision to reserved? Because if I feel like this is some usage that's going to last for a fair amount of time, then you're going to want to start looking at how to optimize it and get a commitment. And that's how much do I reserve? So if you look at your historical usage of DynamoDB, how much of that should be converted to a reservation? How much of it should stay sort of not committed because usage may go up or down in the future? So to address these questions, we launched the DynamoDB reserve capacity recommendations. And this is in the same console that you have today for your other RI recommendations like RDS and EC2 and whatnot. So you can go into this console, you can click the dropdown for the resource type and click DynamoDB, and right there you'll see populated in your console the recommendations that are based on your DynamoDB usage for both read capacity units and write capacity units separately. So you can commit to them separately. So this feature launched a couple of months ago. We see a lot of customers are getting a lot of savings out of the product, and so we're happy to see that and continue to gather feedback on the feature. But the number one question I get when I talk to customers is, how are those recommendations calculated? How many of you have asked that question? Just curious. And of course, Anna says that. Okay, so what we're doing is we're using an algorithm on the back end of all of our recommendation products, actually, that is looking for the total highest savings dollar amount. What that means is our recommendation model is testing all of the different purchase amounts that may be possible in your environment, and it tests every single one of them. It simulates that spend over time, and it finds the purchase amount that has the highest savings amount number, and that's what gets populated in your recommendation results. And so, for example, if there's a recommendation for 1,000 write capacity units at 90% utilization with a $10 savings, our algorithm is testing 1,100 units, 900 units. It's testing above and below the number to find the one with the highest savings amount. Now, you'll also notice that sometimes utilization is not 100%, where you'll actually get more savings if utilization sometimes is maybe a different number depending on your environment. And that's important to note because a lot of companies target a specific utilization amount, but that's not always the highest savings you get. So with that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Anne to talk about how these DynamoDB recommendations work in the Cap 1 environment.
Yeah, well, before I get into that, just to set some context as to why we are so excited about the DynamoDB changes. So Capital One, if those aren't familiar with who Capital One is, we are a financial institution based in the United States. We have about 12,000 or so, give or take, engineers. Most of those are folks that are developing applications for our customers. We primarily build things in-house. So with that, one of our favorite services that AWS has to offer is DynamoDB. And the reason why it's one of our favorites is primarily because of our resiliency requirements. With DynamoDB, you use global tables, you get your two-region resiliency kind of out of the box. Something that's really hard about DynamoDB, especially with global tables, is how expensive that service is. I hear some folks chuckling. You've paid that price tag. But if you think about the cost of resiliency or cost of not having resiliency, that is much higher in terms of brand cost than the dollars that you are spending. So we have been all in on DynamoDB because of the resiliency gains that it gets us. That said, how we manage DynamoDB is really important because of how much it costs. That's really important that we get the most we can out of the dollars that we are spending in order to give us this great benefit. So before this feature, and this is something that we worked super closely with AWS on because it was so important to us, it took an engineer a day or so to just generate recommendations, to take a look at them and figure out what is the right water level for us in order to cover, especially because we know our Dynamo use is only going to increase. So if we plan for that, and we have the perspective that we want this long term, because of everything that it's given us, we've been doing our own analysis. And that takes a lot of time. We have recommendations that were coming in for other services that we knew the pattern, right? We knew when we got the other recommendations, we would add a little bit more on top because, as Rick was mentioning, sometimes you want a little bit of a higher coverage to get a bigger discount tier. And we would do that same thing with Dynamo, but it actually took the time because we had to produce our own graphs. We had to produce our own analysis. We had to rationalize it ourselves and do all of that math, and then go talk to finance and re-rationalize it so they also understood. Well, with the new recommendations that are coming out, all of that work is now done for us. One of our principles as we've worked with AWS over many, many years, our cloud journey started in 2014, so we've developed quite the relationship over it's been 10 years.
Yeah, 10 years.
That is hard to believe. But as we've developed that relationship, we've developed trust because we understand how it works, and now we're able to rely on that. So with the purchase recommendations, we are now taking those right out of the system. We still have to do a little bit of selling with our finance team because it's a big check that we're about to write when we do the reservations, but it has saved an incredible amount of time. It has sped up our analysis by an order of magnitude so that we can be looking at other things as well. So this is something that we have implemented and we are definitely reaping the benefits of.
I've got to say, so your team helped us in the engineering phase of this entire feature. And so using Capital One data, testing it with your team, getting that feedback, and we made several improvements to the feature as part of our engineering process because of Capital One's feedback. So thank you.
Oh, anytime.
So very cool experience.
But yeah, this has been really amazing for us.
Okay, we're going to switch gears. We're going to talk about split cost allocation now. Again, so a fair number of you raised your hands that you've looked at this feature. This might be a little bit of recap, but we're going to talk a little bit about not just how to turn it on and see that data in your CUR, but what it looks like to get the data out of the CUR and how to use that data for your own dashboards. So just to start with, what is the split cost allocation data concept? This is the idea that you can enable the capability and look at taking your EKS costs or ECS costs and splitting them into different line items in your CUR. And this is important because you may have EKS or ECS clusters that are spanning multiple applications, and you don't want to necessarily proportion the entire cost of your container platforms to one team or another team. So you want to split that up. The opt-in process is pretty easy. It's a single button click in the preferences console in the cost management screen. And once that turns on, you can start to see this data in your CUR. You can also tag and use cost allocation tags to create either like a percentage split or other custom splits of the spend of your EKS clusters into different groups. So you can kind of break this thing down a little bit more effectively. This also helps you save a little bit of money because if you proportion out all of the costs for your clusters to different application teams and there's some left over, you know that there's some amount of your capacity that's not going to serve a business need, and that's a prime opportunity for you to clean it up or maybe repurpose it and use it for other things. So again, how to get started, you can just turn it on. Here's a screenshot. It's literally a checkbox in the preferences page of the cost management console. And then you can immediately view after your cur regenerates, you'll see the EKS and ECS costs in the cur file. Now, a lot of people will pull Athena queries or use the cur query library to create and pull this data from the cur. Or you can do something like use the cost intelligence dashboards, which have a pre-built dashboard for this. And so you can look at and visualize your split costs in your own dashboards or in the cost intelligence dashboards. Actually, I'm curious how you visualize them. And you want to tell me how you visualize them?
I may or may not, because it depends on a third-party tool that I want to get rid of our system. I'm looking forward to how it will work in the future, though.
Cool. Okay, so I'll hand it to you to go through how you do it.
All right. So today we use a vendor product actually to do this, which goes against some of our like our guiding principles. So wherever possible, we use cloud native. Whatever cloud provider it is, use their native tooling, because that's the experts built that tooling, and it's going to show you what you need. Today, since this didn't exist for us, we did have to use a third party. We largely build our own FinOps tooling, but we integrate with point solutions. Only a couple point solution integrations at this point. This was one of them. It's one of our final ones left. And as you can see here from the slide, I won't go through it all, but it's really cumbersome. It's really cumbersome to get that data, but the data matters a whole lot because we're charging that back. For EKS specifically, where we use that is actually in shared platforms. We have a principle within Capital One that we rely on shared platforms to provide functionality across all of our business units. And the reason why we do that is a lot of efficiencies. Some of it is cost efficiencies, but also it's you build it once, you add on top of it, and it benefits everybody. We have a very robust inter-sourcing contribution method for these platforms. And for EKS, that is the underpinning of many of our shared platforms. And so what that means is we have a lot of tenants that are running on top of this EKS infrastructure and having to decompose who gets charged for what, because each of our business units has their own P&L, is incredibly complicated. And quite honestly, the tenants that were being charged back were questioning the cost because of this complication that we had behind the scenes. It wasn't exactly transparent from them. They could tell that there was some complexity. So questioning, are they getting the right chargebacks? Are they actually being charged for their utilization? Or are they being charged for their utilization plus half of another division's utilization because of some of the math that was happening behind the scenes? That's all going to change. When we implement the EKS split allocation, which is in the coming months, we're going to be able to remove our reliance on that third-party vendor. We're going to be able to remove a lot of the hurdles that we have today. As you can see from here, it's just slow. But with the new functionality that's coming out, we can pull it whenever we need. We know how it works, so we can explain to any of the tenants as well as the platform team that is actually operating the platform how this works. And the biggest benefit that we'll have is reliability. That we know what we are charging, we know what we are charging back to the owning divisions is right. And if there's any question, we can just go back and repull the data because it's at our fingertips. And that's not something that we had prior to this. So being able to do this split allocation is really going to change our game in terms of building that trust with our internal customers Because as you all know, when you lose that trust, you almost can't get it back. It takes a whole lot. And something like this is actually not just a technical implementation for us, but also a trust-building cultural implementation, which will not just be for this, but it will be for the whole FinOps practice as a whole.
I also see that it talks, your slide talks about the savings plan data as it relates to your allocation. How does that work?
Yeah, so for our savings plans, we look across the entire gamut of our services. We know we are going to be with AWS for a very long time, and we know our utilization is going to be high. So we're actually pretty aggressive with our savings plans. Those, looking at the various different options, whether it be 1 year, 3 years, like we go for the 3 years, and then we renew at the 3-year mark because we know what's coming. But what we've actually started to do is make those 3-year renewals at smaller increments so we can cover at those higher level watermarks. So with those smaller increments, it's also super important that we have the granular data to have confidence in those small increments. So having this type of granularity there, coupled with all of the other services that we can purchase as part of the savings plan, is going to allow us to cover at a much higher watermark than we were before, and be able to sustain that, and because they are smaller increments, be able to adjust that over time. That's going to lead to higher savings rates, which then will turn into budget that we can allocate for other innovative projects.
Yeah, you talked about that this morning, like finding money for the GPUs, right? That's a great opportunity.
This
so
is
you're
one
able
area.
To increase the confidence in your usage to increase the savings plan coverage.
Yeah, and so when we do the savings plans approvals, right, the team will send an email saying, hey, we need a new savings plan at this rate, and this is how long, and this is the dollar figure associated with it. Sometimes I have some heart palpitations that come through on the dollar figure. I'm approving what? But because we now have this data, I know it's grounded in fact, and I have confidence in it.
Hey, we launched the return savings plan feature.
I don't want to have to use that, though.
I hear
don't
you.
want to have to
But
do
we
the
definitely
undo.
don't want people to have heart palpitations in their buying
I know.
Okay, so we're going to talk next about data exports. So the data exports platform is a new platform in the AWS console that allows you to export several types of data. There's Cur 2.0, there's Cost Optimization Hub, and there's also Focus. So we're going to talk a little bit about 2 of those 3, and we're going to start with Focus. So currently today, as available in the console, we have data exports for Focus 1.0 in preview format. And what this is it aligns to the 1.0 specification. You can export it kind of similar to a Cur file where you can identify an S3 bucket and put your data export file there. And you can also go in there and select which columns and data sets you want in your export. So if you want to shrink your file size, for example, you don't have to select all the columns in your data export. If there's certain columns that you're not using yet, you can always add them back later and have access to those things in the future. You can also select via columns and filters via console or SQL as well. So you can kind of automate some of this stuff and use code to manage your files. This includes all of the 43 columns for Focus 1.0. There's also 5 additional columns that we added because there's a couple of AWS-specific things we wanted to give you visibility on and a little bit more granularity from the 1.0 spec. And of course, the AWS participation in this Focus spec is for us to try to make sure that that stuff gets into the standard in future releases. So we're going to talk about some of the data structure in the Focus 1.0 preview. This is important because the consistent treatment of discounts, whether that's savings plans or RIs, this is consistent for all platforms that are using the standard. So now you can take a look at savings plan, amortized cost in a single column. We call that the effective cost column. This is really important because that amortization can be difficult and it can be maybe different depending on the data provider of choice. And so this is a great standardization that the FinOps Foundation has been driving. and Anne has been driving. And this allows you to easily also take a look at a new line item that shows you the savings plans that are not utilized. So you can quickly and easily track commitments that you can maybe utilize by moving other resources into a committed area. Say if you have a bunch of resources that are not under, say, a reservation or an instant savings plan, you can, and then you have some unused instant savings plans, you can move those instances into the unused savings plan, which it's pretty nice. It's almost like free money because you get to move those instances into something that was already prepaid for at a high discount amount. So the total cost, the effective cost of those instances becomes zero because you've already paid for the commitment. Okay, so there's two ways to create data exports. If you go into the data exports console, there's a little button on the top right to create a new export, or there's a CLI example on the screen if you are a CLI fan. You can write custom basic SQL queries as well for filtering in rows and columns. So ideally, you know, the whole idea behind a lot of this stuff is we're making it easier. We want it to be very easy to pull data out of the console and out of AWS for you to have access to. And then once you pull that out, you should be able to query the focus data, whether you're going to use Athena or if you're going to use a different query language of your choice or platform of your choice, and then visualize that. And kind of similar to what I was talking about with the split cost allocation, an example is the Cloud Intelligence dashboards will support and pull all of that focus data, and we have a focus dashboard in the Cloud Intelligence dashboards that's free to use if you're already using CIDs or if you want to take a look at those. So that's one example of how to utilize the focus data to take a look at your costs. Switching gears now, there's also the Cost Optimization Hub data export. Behaves in a similar way. This is, how many of you have enabled Cost Optimization Hub? Okay, not enough. I encourage you all after this session to go turn it on. We're so proud of this feature because one of the struggles in the optimization space is how do you manage commitments versus right sizing? And ideally, how do you do both together, right? Because if you reserve everything, then right sizing gets harder. If you right size everything, you may have unused commitments. And this is where we bring both kinds of optimization together in a single product, and then we deduplicate the savings data. How many of you have seen like savings reports where the savings amount is more than your total bill because they double count the right sizing and the commitment savings? I'm seeing a lot of head nods, great. So Cost Optimization Hub solves this problem by deduplicating the overlapped savings amount. So it's giving you a savings amount that's much more trustworthy and easier to use to set targets or goals for your optimization initiatives. And what we heard from customers is like, hey, this is great. I already have a platform where I do all my optimization work. We don't want to keep doing deduplication. Can you do it for us? So providing all of the cost optimization data set in an export format allows you to pull this into your products and tools, dashboards, what have you, so you can look at deduplicated savings numbers that directly come from the savings plan recommendations, the compute optimizer right size recommendations, the RI recommendations. There's even an EC2 idle detection recommendation in compute optimizer there as well. All of that feeds into this data set. So you can do the same thing. You're going to see 25 columns in this data set. Each row is a recommendation. So there's a lot of recommendations. It can be overwhelming at times. So giving you access to this data so you can sort, search, filter, break it down by tag, right? So you can look at it by organization or account boundaries, whatever boundaries that your organization uses. And there's over 15 types of recommendations in this export. Things like Graviton migration recommendations, EC2 idle recommendations, savings plan, RI recommendations, all of that's in this data set. And by the way, every time you do an export, the data will perfectly match what you see in the Cost Optimization Hub console and API. There's never a mismatch between the two data sets. So we're happy about that. So with that being said, Anne, how are you using it?
Yeah, so two parts. The focus piece of it. This is something we're super excited about. One of the features that you were mentioning was, the net cost after all of the discounts. That is something that we were doing today on our own without any sort of smarts from AWS. And I'd like to think most of the time it was right, but we know it's probably not right. Some of the times, we were using it to validate that what we thought the sort of stacking of discounts and stacking of savings plans and contractual levers, that, what we thought our net effective discount was, a lot of times was right. Sometimes it wasn't, though. And that then, when that wasn't right, that then had cost to the organization that we weren't transparent about because we had gotten that wrong. So I'm super excited to be using that field to do some comparisons. We actually also use that type of data to do some reconciliation between our bill and what we think that we should pay. So a little bit of sort of cost accounting to make sure that all the I's are dotting, T's are crossing, those types of things. A little bit of trust but verify happening there. And we're also looking forward to using that export with other cloud providers. AWS is our predominant provider. We have some small use other places. And being able to aggregate all of that data together to show a true cost of cloud is going to be incredibly powerful for our organization. We're also super excited about the changes coming to that came for the cost optimization hub. Before I get into those, though, anyone here decide, hey, I'm not going to use the AWS cost optimization engine, I'm going to develop my own algorithm and use that recommendation? And does anyone do that? So I'm alone in that.
I love it. I'm so happy to see that.
So maybe this is a little bit of a reflection moment for me. No, but we actually do our own algorithms for optimization. And the reason being is we started this back in 2014 when this didn't exist. And we have just carried it over year. And in some ways, the reason why we kept carrying it was because AWS didn't have all of the services that we needed to rip out our own engine. This gets us close. This gets us really close to deprecating our recommendation engine. And what that would do for me is free up an amazing amount of engineering time that I can then focus on helping teams understand how to do the optimization. Focus less on the algorithm, the thing behind the scenes. Focus less on explaining to an engineer who has reverse engineered our algorithm and disagrees with it, and focus more on what can we do to make your S3 more efficient? How can we implement intelligent tiering? How can we implement auto-scaling in a better way for you? Those types of things bring us so much more value than developing our own optimization engine. So we're super excited about this because it's going to pull everything together for us, as you saw from the quick screenshot over there. And we can filter what we use. We can filter out what we don't use. And we can kind of use the best of what's there, tailor to our needs. It also is another reference point for us in terms of the AWS being able to look across our entire ecosystem, not just at a single application or a single account or a single VPC. It can look across the entirety, which matters because of resiliency, right? So it matters because when you're looking at how an application is optimized, you can't just look at one region. You have to look at every region where that application is deployed to determine, are you using those the resources that you have provisioned efficiently? This is going to allow us to see that across the board, and then we can then turn that into insights where appropriate, because it's not going to be everywhere. If the optimization recommendations are going to tell us, we'll save $1,000 a year, and our LOE on doing the implementation is like 6 sprints, the ROI isn't there. But through this, we're going to be able to see that. We're going to be able to help teams prioritize the things that matter most, because we can see across their services, across their entire footprint, and turn that into, if we did 5 things this year, or even if we did 3 things this year, because we know we can't get everything prioritized, these are the things that we should focus on. Here's the data behind it. Now, how can we help you do that so that we can all kind of reap the savings?
You know, one thing we added to Cost Optimization Hub is we added data that shows you which recommendations take no downtime
Yep.
and have rollback capability. So you can filter out recommendations that take more investigation to see, like, how would I implement this, and just focus on the ones that engineers would never even know if you took the recommendation. And I see that as like a great starting spot a lot of times for when customers are asked, hey, where do I get started? Go look at the recommendations that take no downtime and that are easy to roll back. You're going to see a lot of savings that's really easy to go get, and you won't have as many arguments with engineers on why they should be taking the recommendations.
Yeah, so the automation of optimization is the topic that comes up from that. So the things that don't have downtime or don't have as much implication on either your infrastructure as code or your code base, we can then pull into like a single campaign of sorts to do on an engineer's behalf.
Yeah, like EBS. EBS is my favorite to get started with because there's just no downtime. I've seen customers go and take all of the EBS recommendations and they don't tell anyone and nobody knows and the bill just goes down.
Yeah, well, that's one of the areas of biggest waste because you provision a big volume hoping that you'll never hit that ceiling and you generally only never even hit half.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so if you want to get started with the Cost Optimization Hub exports today, again, the same two ways. You can go to either the Cost Optimization Hub console, and there's a button there that says export, and it'll take you to the data exports console where you can set up an export, or you can just go directly to the data exports console inside cost management. If you look in the cost management console on the left side, you'll see the data exports section. You can pick do you want a Cur 2.0 export, a Focus export, or a Cost Optimization Hub export? You can configure the columns and set it up, and it'll put it in an S3 bucket for you. So that's our presentation. Feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for attending. I think we've got Ruben coming back out to see us off. So thank you very much, everyone.
Hey everyone, producer Andrew here. I hope you enjoy this video as much as I enjoy sharing all of these amazing FinOps stories, best practices, and expertise. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, click the notification bell, and leave comments and questions for our speakers. Check out more FinOps X content on our YouTube channel. We appreciate the support.